Let's try to make a start. I don't want you to think that a Southern European chair of this very interesting event is responsible for delaying the start of the lecture. Welcome. Thank you for coming to the 2019 annual lecture of the Manchester Jean Monnet Centre of Excellence. My name is Dimitris Papadimitriou. I'm the director of the centre. And as many of you will know, the centre does an awful lot of things throughout the year on matters relating to Europe, not only relating to the European Union. So follow our website, follow us on Twitter and Facebook if you want to get regular updates on the events we organize. They're very good, you know. Really, I cannot think of a better time that someone with an interest in Europe and the European Union should have in discussing these matters. You know, we are less than 6 months away from Brexit, and the European Union itself is undergoing a tremendous process of change. So, welcome. You won't be disappointed today. I know that you had to brave Manchester weather, and you are giving up part of your Friday afternoon, but I can assure you that what will follow in the next hour and a half will compensate you, not least because the person who will deliver the annual lecture and then engage in a discussion with you is one of the most senior members of the European Commission. Margaritis Schinas is someone with very impeccable European credentials. He has served in many different posts, senior posts in the European Commission as deputy, head of cabinet and head of cabinet, and between 2007 and 2009, a member of the European Parliament. Lately, a very close associate of President Jean-Claude Juncker. I am particularly grateful to Margaritis because I know that under the current climate and as the negotiations progress, Brexit in particular is not an easy topic for the Commission to discuss in Britain. Not many Commission officials visit Britain to discuss Brexit, so we are very grateful that you were able to come, Margaritis. And we have agreed that the speaker will talk for half an hour. And then we will have over an hour for a discussion. So hopefully this is not going to be a traditional lecture. You will have the chance to debate with our speaker on 4 different topics, and I'm just highlighting them now. So if you have questions, just please wait for the relevant section to come up. The first one is economic governance. The second one, somewhat surprising, Brexit. Then immigration, and then foreign policy. So we will have enough time to go through all these 4 sets of topics after the delivery of the set piece by Margaritis. So please join us in welcoming Margaritis Schinas to Manchester.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Actually, this is the second time I come to Manchester. The first time was back in 2011, and it was a rather traumatic experience that I would like to share with you, because I came here with my football team, my local football team, the legendary Aris Thessaloniki, to play a UEFA qualifier with an insignificant local team. I think it was called Manchester City. And with a draw, we would have qualified, but of course we were defeated 3-0. And I can tell you it was a painful experience. If you still Google Manchester City, Aris Thessaloniki, you will see 4,000 Greeks dressed in yellow jumping up, singing, even after the defeat. If you zoom in, you will see me. I'm one of them. So I'm delighted, Dimitri, that you give me the opportunity to come back to Manchester on a, I hope, more enjoyable experience to discuss Europe, and to discuss Europe within a university setting, which is, I think, is particularly fitting. I also would like to seize the opportunity to congratulate you and your colleagues for the great work that the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence is doing in this city, bridging expertise from across the two universities and organizing events like this one, and not only like this one, but also research studies that broaden the understanding of the complexity that surrounds the European Union. So I was asked to talk to you about the future of Europe, but there is no way that one can approach the future of Europe without addressing two rather elementary questions. The first being, where are we coming from? What has happened so far? Then, where do we find ourselves at present? And only then we'll be able to discuss the future. So allow me very quickly to start with a rather succinct look at the past. I see the average age in this theater, and I think that most of you, the past was not something that you are familiar with. But I think you can only understand the European Union as it stands today by taking a look back. So if you take a look back, you will see that the European Union, or the idea of European integration, call it as you like, has been vindicated by history. And I'm not trying to spin you now, as my day job would ask me, imply. But I think that this historic success of the European integration is mainly grounded, is justified, it's documented by three major achievements. Achievement number one, peace. This is the longest period in the many centuries in this continent where Europeans lived in peace. For the last 70 years, after the Second World War, there was not a shotgun heard in Europe. There were civil wars, unrest in the Balkans around us, but not within the European Union. So the major accomplishment of the project, what the founding fathers had in mind, namely to bridge the gap and the burden of history between the winners and the losers of the great wars, has been achieved. You, and probably me, our generation, and probably the generation of our fathers, are the first generations of Europeans who didn't fight a war. And this is important. We may consider this given, but in a continent where everybody fought everybody across Europe, this is a huge achievement. Two, during these 70 years of European integration, the average level of economic development increased on average by 7. We are now 7 times more rich than when the EU started from the ashes of World War II. We have the biggest single market on the planet, not only the biggest in terms of size, 500 million consumers, but the most, these are the most informed consumers on earth. This single market operates on the basis of social, consumer, and environmental rules that are top worldwide. And it's not a secret that this jewel in our crown is the main reason, and I will come to that in a second, that all other major trade partners want to have a meaningful, deep trade relationship with us, because our single market makes us strong. And the third historic achievement, I think, is that the European Union has become the world's epicenter of soft power. This is a place where we have democracy in all our 28 member states, where the rights of minorities are guaranteed, where the role of women in family and the workplace, in society, is safeguarded, where we take care of our elderly, where we have universal systems of healthcare and of education, where there is no death penalty. Bits and pieces of all this you can find elsewhere. All of this together you can only find in the European Union. So this is who we are. This is what happened to us in the last 70 years. And this is something that we should not forget or sweep under the carpet when we discuss the present and the future of our union. Let me come quickly to the present. And as present, I would define these four, we still have one to go, formidable years of the current institutional cycle, the one that started in 2014 and will come to an end next year with the European elections. So if one looks back at these last 5 years, I would say this was the period where the European project was tested by a sequence of very intense, largely unforeseen, at times violent crises that tested the European Union, tested the limits of our cooperation. Let me remind you what happened in the last 4 years. We had a very difficult negotiation with a new radical government in Athens that brought both Greece and the Eurozone at the brink of the abyss. Immediately after that, we had the largest population movement in Europe after the end of World War II, with the collapse of Libya and Syria and the massive influx of more than 1 million desperate people who basically crushed Europe's door to come to the European Union and save their families from war and persecution. We had Russia invading and annexing Ukraine. We had jihadi Islamism, not in the Middle East, but in the streets of Paris, Brussels, and Nice. We had a certain referendum in a certain country that was meant to settle a certain issue for generations, that created the situation in which we find ourselves in. We had Trump, we had the rise of populism, and all this happened in the last 4 years. Juncker, I think, found a very telling term to describe this. He called it, it's a Greek term, by the way, Dimitri, he calls it the polycrisis, because it all happened successively very quickly. So, what is the main lesson to be drawn from this polycrisis? I think one, or probably two. The first is that the European Union proved much more resilient than some of its distractors would have expected or even hoped for. The Eurozone did not go belly up. Greece does not use the drachma. The migration crisis is now under control. I know that the solution is not yet there. I'll come to that in a second. We saved 700,000 lives in the Mediterranean. Our Eurozone economies and all our 28 economies are back in growth. We have a record high since last year of employment in Europe. 265 million Europeans are in employment, 13 million new jobs since the start of the Juncker Commission. I don't claim that these 13 million jobs have been created by the Juncker Commission. But had 13 million jobs been lost in Europe, I'm sure that the tabloids would have said it's Brussels' fault. So now that the opposite happened, let me at least claim some credit in this setting. So lesson one of the polycrisis is that in a way the European Union proved much more resilient, or too big to fail, if you like. Lesson number two, and that would probably be also my conclusion, is that Europe stands taller together. If you think back at this polycrisis, these are crises that affected practically everybody. North, South, East, West, old Europe, new Europe, socialist Europe, liberal Europe, Christian Democrat Europe. So these are the sort of crises that compel everybody at the end of the day to value the right of unity and claim that the only way to withstand the complexities and the difficulties that surround us is by sticking together. Let's come to the future now. And you know what they say about the future, that it's always difficult to discuss future. But I would like to do it in a more, how should I say, academic way, not very political, not very scientific. I would like to identify 5 building blocks that I think would be the main elements on which the future of the European Union will be based. Policy blocks. Then I will say a few words on an issue which is not part of our positive agenda, Brexit. And I would also say a few words on how we can discuss Europe, how you can communicate Europe, so that I think that would complete the picture of this initial presentation. And then, of course, I'm delighted to debate and exchange with you. So the first building block necessary for the future of Europe is the reform of our economic and monetary union. The reform of economic policy mix, if you like. There is a pathology in Europe that when the economy goes bad, then we try to fix it. We invent processes, the European Stability Mechanism, the European Financial Stability Framework, the banking supervision, the surveillance mechanisms, the resolution board. But then, when the economy turns to the better, then the drive of reform stops. Governments are not interested. We believe that we need to fix the roof now that the sun is shining. We need to complete the economic and monetary union, which for the moment relies on a very powerful central bank and on a system of a banking union, again situated in the bank, but we need to complete this with a capacity for the Eurozone to be able to have not only sticks, but also carrots, incentives, tools that would allow our economic policy to bridge asymmetric shocks before they turn to crisis. The problem that we had, although the financial crisis was not, as you know, of a European making, the roots of the crisis was the subprimes on the other part of the Atlantic. But of course, when the tsunami hit us, of course, it revealed the structural deficiencies of the Eurozone. These deficiencies we must now correct. We started with a very ambitious investment program, the so-called Juncker plan, that put 350 billion euros in the real economy since 2014. We have introduced more flexibility in the Stability and Growth Pact, but I repeat that we need to complete the EMU reform. We need to set up a European monetary fund. We need not to rely on our international trade partners. We need to improve the international role of the euro. It's unthinkable, if not ridiculous, that we buy in the world market European products by using dollars, that we buy European straight oil in dollars, that we buy Airbuses in dollars. So we need to reinforce the role of the currency, and we need to make it an important leverage of our global projection in the world. 2, we need to complete our migratory policies, our migration policy, switching from the crisis mode, which is more or less now behind us, into a paradigm shift that would allow the European Union to have a meaningful, sustainable migration policy for the long run. We don't have one now. We were able to cope because, as always in the crisis, we found the money and the tools to cope in terms of migration crisis management. The numbers are falling, but we need to have a comprehensive migratory policy for the long run that would have few elements that will be written on stone. First, we need to be able to control our external borders, which is not happening now. So we are setting up a European Border and Coast Guard with a permanent force of 10,000 guards who will be patrolling Europe's borders, alleviating the pressure from our frontline member states. 2, we need to reform the asylum laws so that member states can share amongst themselves the burden of asylum seekers. Our asylum legislation, as it stands now, is modeled in a situation in the 50s and the 60s, where the only asylum seekers coming to Europe were the victims of the Greek, Spanish, and Portuguese dictatorship. We are not there anymore. Now we have massive asylum waves, influx that we need to share and share the burden between our member states. We need to work with Africa so that we build a new partnership with Africa, not a new neo-colonial deal, but a new partnership of equals, not by spraying public money to projects that mainly go to airports and to the presidential palaces, but real productive investments that keep young Africans in their countries and contribute to their success and development. And we need something else that is not probably very popular in Europe, but it's necessary. We need also to have a meaningful system for returns of the people who cannot or are not entitled to claim asylum and cannot come to Europe. They have to be returned. I know that in our European DNA, return is something which has never been popular, but when you have to face a situation with an unprecedented rise of population in Africa, if we don't have a system of return for illegal immigrants, we will never have a meaningful European migration policy. Third building block for the future, we need to review our budget. You know that in the way we budget in the European Union is on the basis of 7 years. We call it in a very awkward, the term is MFF, which means multi-annual financial framework. It's a nightmare of a communicator to say MFF, but anyway, it's the 7 years budget. We need to shift our spending priorities from the traditional areas where mainly vested interests and lobbies expect the money from Brussels forever, to new policy areas where Europe faces real challenges. This entails much more money for migration, much more money for security, much more money for research and development, entrepreneurship, artificial intelligence, disruptive research, and probably less money for agriculture and pathways and fountains in the city centers. We need to put our money where our priorities, our new priorities will be. 4, we need to review the role of Europe in the world scene, both as a global actor in terms of international relations and foreign policy, and as the world's champion of free and fair trade. I start with trade because, as you know, trade is an exclusive competence of the European Union, and this is the key to our success. This is what makes us competitive. This is why we can export our products across the globe, but not only our products, we also are exporting our standards across the globe. We have, in the last 4 or 5 years, concluded very ambitious, meaningful trade agreements with Canada, with Mexico, with Korea, with we're finalizing one with Mercosur. And this makes the European Union the center of the web of international trade agreements that will boost our economies and will export also our market governance standards, if you like. This is big. It is something that does not affect, contrary to the urban myths, big business. This is mainly about small and medium enterprises that can open up markets, and this will remain a top priority for the future. Now, we need to be able to accompany our strength in international trade with our strength in foreign affairs. This is not happening. It is not happening because our member states run their foreign policy through very, how should I put it now? This is being registered. I don't want to be impolite or undiplomatic, but through very closely knit networks of national diplomats. Deep state. They don't want to share. They don't want to do things together. They are very happy to share a currency, but they're not able to share a common voting list in the United Nations. They very often project this fragmentation in the world in a way that does not benefit Europe. So we need to be able to move on foreign policy in a more concerted way. And a starting point would be to introduce qualified majority voting in foreign policy. If across the board it's something that scares people in the capitals, we propose that we start with 2 areas of foreign policy where there is an added value for quick actions, which is when human rights are at stake and when sanctions need to be introduced. So let's start with these areas. So through qualified majority, we will be able to assert more certainty and more predictability in the way Europe behaves, operates, and projects its strategic weight internationally. The 5th building block, which is necessary for the future, and which is not yet there, and it will have to be developed, and I think it will be mainly the call of your generation, is to consolidate this strange animal called European democracy. I say strange animal because it's like this Himalaya Yeti. European democracy is like the Yeti of Himalaya. Nobody has seen it, but everybody knows it exists. So European democracy, no one is able to say what is European democracy. At the same time, this is something that we desperately need. Let me start by saying what is not European democracy. Certainly it is not the aggregate of our 27, 28 democracies. This is not the European democracy. It is not the fact that we all have rights as citizens does not make the European Union necessarily more legitimized. European democracy is everything that would help us give our citizens a right to attribute blame or praise on everything that is happening at the EU level. And the fact that lately, in the recent, say, 15, 20 years after the single market, we have pulled together so much sovereignty in Europe. It's a mistake that this unprecedented pool of sovereignty is not accompanied by an equal pool of democracy. So we need to be able to use new forms of democratic participation in Europe, starting by the European elections next year, where, as you know, our ambition is to have a meaningful pan-European debate where political parties across the European Union, through their European political family configurations, will be able to run on joint tickets, where we will have these notions of yet another unpronounceable term, Spitzenkandidaten, the lead candidates who would be running for each political family, claiming the right to lead the European Commission. We need more primaries, we need more debates, we need more, how should I put this with a soundbite? We need more people like you and fewer people like me. This is how European democracy would work. We need to be able to open up, discuss, confront the arguments. Again, the phrase is bad, but we need to de-Brusselize Europe. And I'm delighted that I have a chance to start from Manchester, of all places, de-Brusselizing Europe. Okay, few things on Brexit or not?
We can leave it for the discussion.
Okay, let's leave it for a discussion. What I will say on the Brexit is that it's happening. Yes, it is happening. And it is not part of our positive agenda. It's not one of these 5 building blocks I just described. It's something else. What is it? It's a divorce. And as in all divorces, this is a sad thing. There is nothing pleasant around it. There is no way that this can be something pleasant. Both for the partner who opens the door and leaves, and both for the partner, how do you call this in English? The guilted partner. The partner who stays behind. This is us. So this is a sad occasion, and I don't like to burden you with sad thoughts. So, as in all divorces, this is now in the hands of the specialists, the divorce lawyers. And they have to find a deal, and they have to do it on time because there's not much time left. So don't expect a big lecture on Brexit because the subject for me is not particularly inspiring. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Margaritis, for covering so many topics in such direct way. I plan to stick to these 4 topics and leave a quarter of an hour for each of them. I will be starting with a question or two, and then we can be collecting a few more questions from the audience on each particular topic, and we'll give you the opportunity to answer. And I'll start first with not Brexit, but with economic governance, because that's an important issue. I mean, I know both you and I come from Greece, and we know that the Greek crisis brought much bigger questions about economic governance in Europe. And the question really is this, that for whatever reason, the introduction of the euro appears to have had polarizing effects on the European economy. There are very clear winners, there are very clear losers. The question is, how does the European Union compensate the losers? And can this be done under the current institutional configuration? And can it be done with such small budget? So could it be that in dealing with the crisis, we were all in it together? But of course, now, the rewards from the introduction of the euro become a matter of national prerogative. And the second question, very briefly, relates with the role of the European Commission. Of course, in the literature, we know that one of the biggest victims of the Eurozone crisis was the credibility of the European Commission, because very often, Germans in particular and others, blame the European Commission from not having done enough to prevent the crisis. And we've seen how the European Commission in the aftermath of the crisis has been relatively marginalized. What comes from that, of course, is can the economic governance of the European Union, with all of its redistributive problems and so on, ever work well without the European Commission? 2 questions to start off with. I suggest we'll take a few more, and then I will give you a bit more time to think about it. There is a microphone, if you don't mind speaking to the microphone so that you can be heard in the recording. Don't be shy. We don't expect expert opinions. Yes, over there, in the front.
You will not grade.
I will not grade it. I'm not that good at it.
Hello, this is Dimitris Papadimitriou from the University of Sheffield. I have to say for a start that I was also attending that match in the Aris versus Manchester City, although I do not support Aris.
Okay.
Is it open?
Yeah.
Google it, you will not regret if you will.
For sure, for sure. So the first question would be about economic governance. We know that the first discussion about the existence of a stabilization capacity appeared in the Werner report in the 1970s. So nearly 50 years after, and of course, this time, in the meantime, in many occasions, there were this stabilization capacity was opposed consistently by certain member states. What makes you think that this will change now? And the second question...
Can we just keep one for now, and then I will leave people to... I don't want to abuse the chair, but there is another question.
Ian Harden, also from the University of Sheffield. First of all, thank you very much for an inspiring presentation. I've very much enjoyed it and profited from it. My question relating to economic governance comes from my rather casual reading of the French and Italian press. And my impression is that fiscal and budgetary issues are usually discussed in the press in terms of the Maastricht criteria and what the Commission will or will not allow. That has the effect of, one of the effects is that national politicians who want to be fiscally responsible look as if they are defending Brussels. against what the populists would call the interests of the people. So it feeds into a populist agenda. My two questions related. First, do you recognize the problem? Second, if you do, what do you do about it?
Thank you very much. Is there any, yes? If you can keep your questions brief, unlike me, that will help.
So my question is about austerity. So after the financial crisis, Britain and the EU both embarked on policies of austerity, which I believe were not correct. I want to ask, why was there no focus on pro-growth policies? Why was there no focus on improving the economies of Southern Europe? I believe it was the wrong decision to embark on austerity because people suffered, jobs were lost, and that fed into the populism we had today. And I know why it happened here because our government has an ideological basis for that. But I feel like if Europe had stood up and said, no, we're not going to embark on austerity, that would have put a lot of pressure on the British government to not continue their disastrous policy of austerity, and we would never have had Brexit. So I just want to know, like, why was this policy, why did everyone go for it? Because no economist has ever said that it's good policy. Like, I've studied austerity in depth. It's a complete fallacy.
Thank you very much. Any other, just one on the back there? Sorry, you wanted a question as well, yes, please.
Yeah, just thank you very much. My name is Olivier, I come from France. Would have one question by the presentation. You were really positive about Europe. Thank you very much for taking the time of convincing, let's say, our generation. Is the crisis really behind us? You spoke about immigration, it is done. The boat Aquarius is still blocked in Malta. Brexit is happening. Populism are increasing. Germany is having now local votes and etc. So is it really behind us? And how do you see the future? Maybe your personal opinion and what you're going to do for this.
Okay, let's take a final point over there. Let's try and keep into the topic if you can.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation from the University of Manchester. So about economic governance, you talk in your speech about growth from an environmental point of view and societal point of view. Do you think absolute growth or the quest for it is the way forward or the only way forward?
Okay, Margaritis, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, there is a common denominator in all these questions, and I think to be able to look at the future, there again, when we discuss economic and monetary union, we have to start with what happened when it all started. The economic and monetary union, let us be very brutally open. It was a collective leap of faith. It was not based on a very scientific, I would say, economic analysis of how it's going to work. After the German reunification, the French and the German reached the understanding where the Deutsche Mark would be too powerful an instrument for a unified Germany, so they would drop it, and the French would accept that in exchange of a single market, a common currency which will be based in a central bank in Germany, but not run by a German, would somehow work. And you know what? Surprisingly, to a certain extent, it did. It did work when the economic cycle was positive. This very elliptical construct of a central bank and a single market, that was the only commonalities in the common currency. Everything else was up in the air. We had a Stability and Growth Pact, which was supposedly the collective contract of discipline and rules. We had, of course, the Maastricht criteria to accede. That was more or less done. Then once inside, we had the Stability and Growth Pact rules to keep it under the same software. Let me remind you, everybody broke the Stability and Growth Pact rules. Everybody. Including the Germans and the French. And you know what? They got away with it. If my memory doesn't fail me, I think tiny Luxembourg and pious Finland are the only Eurozone members that stuck to the rules. Everybody else broke the rules. So let us not forget this. Austerity that struck the South, okay, it reads nice as a political conclusion. But the South, within this elliptical construct, during the first 10 years of the EMU, Greeks, Spaniards, and Italians thought that all of a sudden became Germans because the exchange rate came down, because money through the banks in euros were available across the board. So the Greeks organized the most expensive Olympics ever. They bought all sorts of planes, war games, navy ships on offer. The Spaniards built up the biggest housing bubble on earth. So the South, okay, which suffered the correction, as everybody did, also fell victim to this original asymmetry. So, what we need to do now, and frankly, that's what we have been doing. First of all, we had to make sure that in the 4 countries where the fire broke out, like where we had these programs, we had to make sure that these countries stay, that the walls withstand the fire. And this was done. In Portugal, in Ireland, in Cyprus, in Greece, and to a certain extent, in Spain. Ireland and Cyprus did not create massive debts as Portuguese. You know what they did? They allowed their financial sector to owe 6, 7, or 8 times more than the state itself, which was another lack of the elliptical construct of the EMU, because there was no banking supervision, there was no banking resolution, there was no referee. So all these asymmetries, all these problems now have to be corrected, and have to be corrected in the light of the lessons drawn from the crisis, looking back and seeing how much people suffered. And there are some positive, since we're talking about democracy and people, I think, and I would like to pay tribute to the people who suffered this adjustment. And they suffered it in a way that did not put in question the fundamentals of belonging to a common European currency. This is important. This is something on which we need to build on. 2, other than the bank and the emission of a common currency, we need to have an economic union. That means we need to budget together. And this is happening now in the so-called European economic semester, where member states budget in a way that is compatible to each other. And part of what you're reading in the Italian press is precisely this process that would allow us to address divergences within the semester before this become crisis. What else do we need? We need banking union. We need supervision, we need resolution that we have already, and we need to complete it with the 3rd stage of the banking union, which we do not have, which is a system of collective deposit guarantee, which will have to come, because that would put some order forever in the banking sector in the European Union. What else do we need? I won't take much of your time. We also need some sort of capacity, you said it, to address these asymmetries with a positive, some people call it, the French call it, a Eurozone budget. Others call it an EU, a Eurozone capacity. Others call it a structural support mechanism. We need this urgently, and we will get it. This will be the first, if you like, post-austerity tool that will emerge. And I want to go even more politically blunt. This is something that Germans owe to the rest, because they are running on these primary superavits. Macron, who crushed the populists left and right, has campaigned on the need to address this. And I think now we're reaching a stage, after our 5 presidents report we produced on the EMU reform and the Messenberg Franco-German summit, I think now we're reaching a stage from now until the European Council of December, we need to have an agreement. I will leave the crisis question for the end, because it goes beyond the economy.
That's fine. A very optimistic outlook on the German finance minister. Not to mention what happened in Italy. We don't have time to go into this right now, but
we'll work it out. With Italy, with Italy, I was trying to make the point that we are at the point where the Italians have sent a draft, their intention to budget. Everybody does it. All member states do it. And now we are in the course of a semester where first the Commission and then all Eurozone member states together will decide on the final budget outlook in the way that is sustainable, that allows Italy to grow, but without introducing an element of risk that inevitably would spill over to the rest. And I think we'll make it work. I don't think this is yet another crisis. This is the European economic semester in practice.
Very good. We're moving on to Brexit and to the divorce proceedings. And you won't probably know this, but here in Britain there is a very, very good charity called Relate, where people who are having marital problems or people who experience post-divorce...
How is it called?
Relate. I wonder, since the European Union is part of that divorce, and in the context of post-Brexit reflection, what would you say was the contribution of the European Union towards the Brexit crisis? You won't need to argue very much in this audience to convince them that many things have gone wrong here in Britain. But in our frustration about the things that go wrong in Britain, we sometimes forget what might have gone wrong in Europe that might have contributed to the Brexit crisis. Because, again, there is never a divorce without mutual blame. So let's keep that question in the back of our minds. It will be interesting to hear how Europeans themselves see this from their own perspective. But on Brexit, any question? Please keep them brief so we can collect as many points as we can, right? Yes, over there. Just wait for the microphone, just 1 minute.
Hi. There's been quite a lot of debate on whether London will stay the financial centre of Europe after Brexit. So just wanting to find out what's your opinion on this. Do you think is there any other European city which can replace London as a financial hub?
Thank you very much. There was another question over there, yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much for this interesting presentation. My question is, what the EU probably or possibly do in the unlikely case that Britain changed its mind and wanted to stay in the EU? Would it be relieved, or would it rather increase the conflict?
Thank you very much. There is a question down there on the front.
Hello. I'm the representative of the 3 millions. I'm the coordinator of the outreach for the 3 millions. I would like to ask you, in the last week, there has been quite good positive feedback about possibly a deal coming through. But in the case of no deal, then would there be any possibility for the European Commission to ask for a ring fencing under Article 50 for EU citizens living in the UK? for the rights. And then I work, at the moment I'm doing a program about the Roma community. Roma community, Gypsy and travelers. And I'm organizing several events with the European Commission representation in the UK, but all these I've done in a volunteer way. And I was going to ask you if there is any plan for the European Commission to help us with outreach, which needs funding after the March 20.
Thank you very much. Yes, there's another question there. It's okay to gather quite a few.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry, thanks very much. That speech was really good. The Brexit vote was actually my first ever vote, and I come from an area of the country that's voted 56% leave, so I wasn't really surprised that it's happening. But my question to you is that you kind of placed a lot of emphasis on kind of democracy in Europe, but if you look at what's happening across the continent, I mean, you've got the Freedom Party in Austria, the Lega and Five Star in Italy, and kind of Eastern Europe going down more kind of a liberalism. My question is, do you think the reforms that you're proposing will stop it or just make it worse?
Thank you very much. Any more points? Yes, one on the back there.
Hi, okay, I'm Kwame. I'm a mentor from Manchester Met, the uni down the road. Thank you so much for really informative speech earlier. But let's be frank, like obviously, the UK is leaving the European Union, and you said it's not really a positive thing for the European Union. So could you reveal to us what example will the UK be made out of for them leaving the European Union?
Okay. And the final question on the back there. Thank you very much. On the very back.
As regarding Brexit, the relationship between the UK and the European Union has for decades always been complicated. Particularly in the Conservative Party, it was also an issue that divided the party, which is the main party in the UK that has been governing the country most of the time. The European Union recognized that this was a very controversial issue in the UK for so long. And when David Cameron in 2015 visited Brussels in an attempt to get special concessions in terms of special relationship with the EU that would challenge some standards in terms of equality of treatment between all member states, my question is, on the one hand, it's true that the European Union has to be aware that an advancement in terms of providing special concessions to one member state would create divisions without the European Union. But on the other hand, it's also very important to recognize that the UK is still, but is going to leave, is the second biggest economy in the EU, so would amount as a huge loss for the European Union in the Brexit context. So my question is, didn't the EU fail to find a balance between these two difficult challenges?
Thank you very much, Margaritis.
Okay. These are mega questions, as they say in California. Let me start with the self-criticism that Dimitris is asking me to do. What did the EU do wrong? Okay, I think two things we could have done better. First is communication. I think that in a way we neglected the very influential and globally influential Anglo-Saxon British media that in a way shape the world media market. We, and I say we, it is the royal we, it's for decades we sort of, we were not very present in the British media. We didn't have people coming here explaining things. We relied, I think, too much to the political class hoping that they will do, as they should, by the way, part of the explanation what it means to be part of a strong union. There were some politicians in Britain at different points in the recent political history in this country that did it, but let us not fool ourselves. This was a country which excelled in Europeanizing blame and nationalizing success. So the overall communication didn't work out, and we have part of this responsibility ourselves. We relied to the political class. We also relied to the so-called social partners, who, by the way, were all very well connected to the European Union decision-making processes, structures, and institutions. The CBI, the farmers, the trade unions, all these people were hooked into our system. But not always they carried the argument for Europe here. So that was one, I think, shortcoming. Another one, which was purely our fault, is that for some time, Brussels and the EU failed to do what we are doing now, which is to be big on big and small on small. The European Union spent too much time on issues that should have been left to national, even regional and municipal governments. This over-regulation was something that was very present in our system, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, when the building up of the single market, opening up markets, was accompanied by a wave of regulation to eliminate distortions of competition, which was a noble objective. But then this argument was, in a way, over-applied and led to the phenomenon of many pressure groups pushing up through our system rather petty issues, small issues that created lots of nervousness and uneasiness in a country like Britain, and not only Britain, but especially in this country, where there is a natural tendency to keep it simple. So for these two, I assume the blame on behalf of the union. Now, financial center. I'm reluctant to tell you which will be the new city of London in a post-Brexit situation, because this will depend in a way from the terms of the future relationship, which we don't yet know. And we don't know if the city would have some sort of equivalence, passporting. All this is open to negotiation. But it is already happening to a certain extent. There are 3 European Eurozone capitals that are pushing very hard to sort of emerge as alternatives for financial services. Frankfurt for the German-speaking banking world. Dublin for the Anglo-Saxon crowd, and Paris for the many French expats who are currently in London that, as you know, may be tempted to go back if the terms of the new relationship do not justify their massive presence now in London. Then, what will happen if Britain change its mind? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Everybody will be happy to have you back. I don't see anyone who would say, no, now we don't want you back. I mean, although that would be a reflex of a partner who was left behind, I don't think, I've been looking around, I don't see, both in the capitals and in the institutions, anyone who would have liked to sort of revenge the British for having gone out and in again. Then, can case of no deal, citizens, and we are looking, option A is of course an agreement that would have 3 elements: a withdrawal agreement, a political declaration with some detail on the terms of our future relationship, and a transitional period to accompany the leave moment to the new relationship. So we're talking about a package with 3 separate components. This would have to be ratified first by the House of Commons, then by the 27 member states and the European Parliament. And all this needs to be done before the 30th of March. That's Plan A. Under Plan A, I think the concerns of EU citizens residing in Britain and of British citizens residing in the European Union will be safeguarded. I don't sense that there will be an issue. You know that we have this the December draft agreement that more or less addresses the issue, and we also have a situation where there will be a role for the European Court of Justice subject to a national procedure to have an oversight. Now, what happens in Plan B? That means that for whatever reasons, either we fail to agree on this or this is not ratified. Well, the only thing that I can say is good luck with Plan B. Because there will be, there will be no structured framework for all this. We've noticed that the Prime Minister said that in any case, EU citizens will be welcome, but we also noticed that in terms of migration, there will be only certain categories of EU citizens that will be accepted. That would obviously create the corresponding anti-viruses in the continent, so hence the good luck with that part. So that's where we are. The clock is ticking. We have 13 days until the Brexit summit dinner set by President Tusk for Wednesday, the 17th of October.
Can we ask you something confidentially?
Oh, yes. I will stay amongst us.
It will stay between these 4 walls and 100 people here. Is it true that Theresa May was ambushed in Salzburg?
No, not at all. I think, and I can be, again, very open amongst ourselves here on what happened in Salzburg. I think that nothing from what was discussed in Salzburg was said there for the first time. All this was known to the British side because this is the essence of the negotiation as it's happening now. What happened in Salzburg? Salzburg is a small city, and there were about, I think, 350 British journalists who came to Salzburg, and they exposed themselves for the first time to the sort of argument that was going on in Brussels. So they discovered this there in a small city, in a small press room, and that created how should I call this? An echo, yes, a loudspeaker sort of effect, an echo chamber effect. So that projected the idea in the British public opinion. This is an ambush, but it was pure atmospherics. It was not substance. Of course, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, in his very youthful and direct style, said something in the press conference that added to this impression, said that the ones who told you that would be easy lied to you, which was not part of the negotiation, but that's also in a way contributed to the atmospherics. But no, there was no ambush, and there was nothing planned against the Prime Minister. Sure. But sometimes, in the European councils, the echo chamber effect is more important than it should be.
We will not frame the Sun front page the day after to give you as a living present from Manchester, that's for sure.
No, but I have a question that I would like to address on populists, and I think it was you, populists, and I think we should distinguish between two categories of critics. We should not pack everybody under the same term. The first are people across Europe who have legitimate, genuine questions about the European Union. People who ask questions and need answers. And we owe answers to these people. These are not populists. These are Eurosceptics, but in the Hellenic term, in the Hellenic notion of the term skepsis, which is a critical thought. And these people are not populists. We should not package them with the other lot. And as far as I can speak for the institutions, especially for the European Commission, we will spare no effort to address these people's concerns and provide the answers, as I'm trying to do it with you today, and as I will do it on many other occasions, me and my colleagues. But there is another lot, who are the people who are out to destroy the European Union. These are people who are not interested in answers. These are people who will never take any answer because they're not interested, they're only interested in demolishing. And my advice is not to spend too much time with these people. I mean, it's like talking to a Politburo member of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union. He would always tell you that the Soviet Union was the paradise on earth. There would be no way to shift this belief. And we know that there are forces today in Europe that play identity politics, play anti-EU politics, and they think that they can destroy Europe. Well, let's see if they can. Because this can happen elsewhere, but not in Europe. And you know why? Because it did happen in Europe twice in the last century. And we all know how it ended. Mm-hmm. So Europe is not the ideal playground for this second lot.
Let me move quickly to the third an important issue, which is immigration. And just to reflect a little bit on what you said about Europe being a community of values where human rights are respected and so on. Well, there is the obvious point that the equivalent of a small town in Europe has been drowned in the Mediterranean over the past 4 years. And the human rights of these people, as somebody who was seeking refuge from a war zone, have clearly not been respected. But there are also, I guess, evidence of a less than perfect human rights record across the EU right now. If you speak to the refugees in Lesbos, under the conditions they experience European, EU kind of safe haven status there, they might not agree entirely with you. If you go, I suspect, in Hungary and speak to people there, perhaps our own understandings of human rights may not match what goes on there. Poland, if you speak to many people in Estonia about immigration, they might have a very different view about what the commitment of Europe to refugees should be. And I think it's clear to all of us as observers that it's not obviously your fault, but it is becoming apparent to us that the European Commission, as the guardian of the EU treaties and the sort of the voice of the collective good in Europe has absolutely no powers to change that. And we worry. Well, I worry. Perhaps others don't. I don't know. But let's see if they are. Any questions on refugees over there?
Thank you very much for your very good presentation. It was really inspiring. My name is Fadıl Ersözer from the University of Manchester here in politics. My question is going to be about the EU's presence in international politics and how it relates to the Brexit issue, because, as you said, the EU needs to revisit its place in international affairs as an actor. I would like to hear what do you think on Brexit, how it would affect the EU's common foreign and security policy, because I think it is a bit puzzling that many of us would like to see the UK remain, of course, but at the same time we know that the UK has been always very conservative about deeper integration regarding the foreign policy cooperation at the EU. So I would like to hear your opinions on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps we can park that question for the next heading, but on immigration?
Hi, thanks very much. My name's Will. Just picking up on the immigration point, it was interesting to hear your list of the building blocks for successful immigration, and one of them was working with Africa to develop new partnerships that keep young Africans in those countries, and I think that hints at the fact that the EU has got a bit of stick recently for working with some fairly unsavoury governments both in Libya and in Sudan and elsewhere, where necessarily stopping young African people in Sudan means working with people who have pretty poor human rights records. So how is the EU going to deal with those contradictions on the ground when we know that the research shows that if you give young people in these countries more development funding, the softer, nicer face of EU migration policy, that actually makes those young people more mobile, not less?
Thank you very much. There was another, yes, over there, Luis.
Hello, my name is Alina Juric. I'm also from the University of Manchester, and I'm wondering how to prevent populism, future populism, or also populism which occurs right now, by not tackling this topic within the 5 policy blocks, because I haven't seen any of those topics that tackle this, but also the European culture. How can certain states identify as a part of Europe and not identify on a national basis?
Okay, there was another question over there.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for making the effort to come here to Manchester. Thank you for everything you said. We've seen, 3 years ago, the pictures around the world show the picture of a boy drowned on a beach on an island in the Aegean, and we've seen, it's been referred to by other people here, but people have been, I think you said it was the equivalent of a small town of people drowning in the Mediterranean. How can we ensure that, even though it's a lot fewer people are coming than there were, there are still people coming, and there's still a war going on in Syria, and Libya's in dreadful crisis. How are we going to ensure that the whole issue of people trafficking is dealt with, and that we ensure that people trafficking stops, or at least can be much less common, and how do we ensure that people stop drowning?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There are 2 questions on the back. That's true Manchester spirit, more questions on immigration than Brexit.
Hi, I'm Norby from the University of Manchester, and I would have a question regarding chain migration. There is this phenomenon that some countries allow the parents and other relatives of migrants and refugees to come inside the country. My question would be that, does the EU do anything in regard of this question? And my other question would be that what is the EU doing with the NGOs that do kind of taxi service on the Mediterranean Sea, bringing migrants from the coasts of Libya to the European Union? Thank you.
Let's take a final question right next to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Mate from Hungary, and when a few years ago this migration started, I think Hungarian people didn't really feel anything done by the European Union, and that's, I think, one of the main reasons why they turned to our current government and why this government is in so much power right now, because that Prime Minister seemed to be the only guy in Hungary who was able to stood up to this crisis and do something, although it was like quite an arguable solution for the problem. But he was, for the population, for the Hungarian population, he was the only guy who seemed to be able to do something about it. So my question is, what did the EU do at that time to tackle this problem?
Okay, let's stop it here. We'll have another round of questions to take after. Margaritis?
Okay, starting point. Yes, it is true that the equivalent of a small town was lost in the Mediterranean, but it's also true that the equivalent of a big city was saved in the Mediterranean. 700,000 people were saved in the Mediterranean since the start of the migration crisis. Equivalent to Thessaloniki, I would say. Why? Because the European Union is and will remain a continent. I'll try to make this point in the historic success part of our working together. We cannot let people drown in the sea. We are the European Union. We are here to save people on the sea. And we will remain a continent of asylum. We will abide by the Geneva Convention. We are Europeans. We cannot do differently. But this does not mean, and don't take this badly, that Europe can become the final destination of the entire African middle class, or 20 million of Afghans or Pakistanis that would, or Bangladeshis that will find their future in Europe. This cannot happen because there's no legal avenue for this to happen. There's no EU competence for this to happen. And if it does happen nevertheless, it will weaken the case for protection of the people who are indeed vulnerable and entitled to asylum. It is a difficult choice, but it's a real choice. The smugglers have a successful business model in the Mediterranean. We have to crush the business model of the smugglers. And we are doing it now. You know how? First, with the EU-Turkey agreement that automatically stopped the trade of desperate human beings in the Aegean. Because from the day of entry into force of the EU-Turkey agreement, smugglers lost their market. There is no point of organizing smuggling operations when you know that upon arrival you will be transferred back. NGOs, they have a legitimate role to play to assist search and rescue operations. But it is not their role to assume or substitute movements of people in the knowledge that these people will not be eligible for asylum. So it is again hard to say, but in a way it facilitates the trade of people who know that by putting themselves in the mercy of a dinghy in the knowledge that an NGO boat will pick them up, that would sort the problem. So for Europe, for us to be able to maintain our role as an asylum destination, as a continent of peace that provides protection to the vulnerable, we have to make sure that the smugglers of human lives and of human misery will be driven out of the market. Second thing we need to do, I said it earlier, we need to have the courage to do and finance return operations. It has to be done. What else do we do? We need to do Africa. We need, let me put it this way, the European Union and its member states is the biggest development aid donor on earth. We give much more money to Africa than anybody else. Americans, Chinese, Turks, we are the world champion of development. But what did we used to do with this development money? Normally was linked to certain sort of infrastructures that were built by European companies, very active in the country, so that our money was coming back to Europe, airports, presidential palaces, ministries. This has to stop. We need now to mobilize productive investments. We need to spur growth in Africa. We do not need camps. We do not need repression. We need incentives. Because through a program, a massive program, some people call it a Marshall Plan, I don't like the term, it's too American for my taste, but we need a massive European investment plan for Africa, which will mobilize public money and will also leverage private capital to spur productive investments and growth and jobs in these countries. Now, ideally, in Africa, we would like all our African interlocutors to be democracies. But, you know, we're not in charge. We cannot guarantee. So I think we have a duty of commitment and we have a duty of engagement, and that we will continue. I will come to Brexit international projection in the...
I'll perhaps we have another 15 minutes to go, and I don't want to leave anyone complaining that we didn't talk about foreign affairs. And I'll start with a very simple question, which is, why is it that Europe's near abroad, it's full of autocracies, failed states, and dictatorships? Is there anything to do with the way Europe has structured these relations? Or is it luck?
Sorry, what are you referring to exactly? To our neighborhood or to...
I'm referring to the wider Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, Belarus, North Africa, the Middle East. Wherever you look in this supposedly new ring of friends that the EU wanted to create in 2004, what we see now is a collection of the most unpleasant regimes or failed regimes perhaps the world has to offer. Any more points on foreign affairs? Yeah, in the back of the back. I don't mean to be the bad guy here, you know. I just need to be asking the challenging stuff first, to give the good example.
Just to further what everyone else has said, firstly, thank you for doing the talk. It was fantastic. Secondly, I'd like to ask you to expand a little upon something that you brought up in the talk. Hot topic at the moment is obviously Russia. We've seen Russian chemical interference even as recent as yesterday. We saw the Netherlands saying that they'd intercepted a GRU-led cyber attack against their chemical weapons detections facilities. If rumours are to be believed, the Russian so-called troll farm has interfered in elections in the UK, in France, certainly along a lot of places in Eastern Europe. So my question to you is, in your opinion, what actions should the EU be taking to combat Russian interference?
Okay, thank you very much. Wow. Let's ask a question over there. We'll try and get 3 more, and then we'll let Margaritis answer. Right?
Hi, my name is Annalise. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Manchester. My question is related to European democracy. I would just want to know if the ratification of the European laws within the national states in the national languages, because there are 24 official languages, has an impact on the European democracy and the harmonization of the European Union. Thank you.
Okay. Over there.
Hi, I'm Mia Gare from the University of Manchester. We've talked a lot about kind of the relations that the EU is going to be building with Africa and beyond. And obviously a lot of those relations are going to be with regional institutions like ASEAN and ECOWAS and the like. And I was wondering if whether you feel part of these relations are going to be about exporting the EU model, or whether the EU model is particularly unique to Europe and perhaps wouldn't work elsewhere where kind of intergovernmental cohesion is perhaps not as established.
Okay, let's get a final question there. Thank you. No, for you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I would like to know what would the foreign policy be in regards to the US? And the other question is, how would the foreign policy be changed so that the EU would be less dependent on countries that are in Africa for the immigrants that come in that work in the EU? Thank you.
You have 5 minutes to answer these very easy questions. Africa, Turkey,
US,
the
Russia.
US, and the neighborhood policy.
Yeah.
Over to you.
We did this on purpose. We left the mega difficult questions at the end so that we can escape. Brexit, rather security and foreign affairs post-Brexit. We are condemned, I would say, the EU and post-Brexit Britain, to have a very close relationship on foreign policy, security, and anti-terrorism cooperation. I hope that this will be the case regardless of option. Of course, without an agreement, it will be even more difficult, but it has to happen. Now, I don't want to sound pedagogical or I told you so-ish, but when Britain had the problem with the Skripals and needed UN support, to whom did Britain turn to? To its European partners. And what response did Britain get? Unanimous support. I hope that this reflex of solidarity survives, persists in the post-Brexit horizon. I do hope. Security. Britain can now pick up nasty guys through the European arrest warrant throughout the European Union. If you have a nasty guy that you're looking for and he's in Marbella or in Mykonos, he can be sent back within days if Britain issues a European arrest warrant. I hope in the post-Brexit horizon there will be an equivalent. I do hope there will be. Not given, especially not given under Plan B. So we are condemned to get these things right. Let's hope that it will be the case, but these things are not given. 2, why are we surrounded by difficult, autocratic neighbors? Because it has always been like this. Tell us a time in history where Europe was surrounded by Switzerlands. Never. we now have some hope that this soft power appeal that Europe exerts in a wider neighborhood, that manages to swing some of these countries. We have some successes. You package them all together. Georgia, for example, is a success story. Armenia is becoming a success story. Moldova is so-and-so. But the soft power appeal is there. If you give me 1 minute, one of the most powerful moments of the Arab Spring was when, from the Tahrir Square, at the peak of the protest, a young Egyptian woman with a scarf on was interviewed at CNN, and she said, "This is because we want to be free. We want to live in a democracy. We want Egypt to look like Europe." This is, well, it didn't actually work. But this is the sort of soft power appeal that we also see when we go to the G7, G20, and we discuss with let the Americans decide, but we discuss with the others. The Canadians, the Australians, the Brazilians, the Argentinians, you know what their people tell us? Thank God you guys are around. Because these people, in the very unstable geopolitical environment that shapes world politics nowadays, they see Europe as an anchor of stability, as a reference point. Russia. How can we cope with interference? I think we cannot provide an assurance from Brussels. This cannot be done from Brussels on behalf of everybody else. We will try. We are trying, actually. We have a system of strategic communication. We have a system of specialized teams that are working to avoid interference. But as we come to the European elections, which is, as you know, the most populous election on the planet after the Indian election is the European election next May, we need some more engagement from our member states, especially the intelligence services that need to do a bit more for us than they are doing it. But you know that these are services that are not very open to cooperation. They're not even very open within the state. You can imagine how open they are vis-à-vis Europe. Then, what did I forget?
The US.
The US, yes. The US. The US is disengaging from Europe. I think I'm not breaking any news when I'm saying this. They, at least under the current administration, they have, their priorities is not a strategic sort of presence in the European Union. They are not privileging the NATO links the way we used to it or get used to it in the post-Cold War era. And this is a problem. This is a problem. At the same time, I think that the US cannot avoid to isolate themselves from everybody. They cannot be at the same time in confrontation with China, with Europe, with NATO, with the emerging world, so I think they're reaching now this conclusion, and we have some early positive signs of this change of attitude. The first is the new NAFTA, which is now called USMCA. It's like a YMCA sort of thing, but it's called USMCA, which is a positive sign because that shows that they are revisiting some of their obsessions in terms of trade. We had a very positive meeting on the 25th of July with President Trump in the White House, where, for reasons that escape me, they struck a certain chemistry with Juncker. You know that he calls him a tough cookie, a nasty guy, but someone who can do business with. So this is something, a flame that we want to keep alive. So I think that my guess for the future is that we will see less strategic US engagement on traditional foreign affairs and security, but we hope that we will not sever all trade links. This is important for us, as it is for them, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I told you it would be good. And let me just thank the audience again for coming and for participating and asking questions. But also many thanks to Margaritis for being so open and so easy to answer questions and take criticism on board. So thanks for coming to Manchester. And please join me in thanking our guest speaker.